I know Jays fans have been disappointed that the Jays traded away Gabriel Moreno, and looking at the way that he's been performing so far in the playoffs, it's not hard to see why. But let me tell you that the Jays have some future stars in their pipeline here that have been performing at a really high level, whether it be Damiano Palmigiani, Ricky Tiedemann in the Arizona Fall League. The Jays have some big time prospects that you may not know about, so we'll break that down and much more on this episode of Jays Digest. Jays fans, I'm your host Peter Vrionis alongside host Nick Goss. Now, Blue Jays baseball's over for the season, but we still have a couple of prospects that have been putting in work in the Arizona Fall League. Ricky Tiedemann probably leads that league in strikeouts right now. I know he did the last time he started a game. I don't know how those numbers are stacking up now. Demiano Palmigiani hit his fourth home run of the Arizona Fall League just a couple of days ago, and those guys have been the two representatives for the Jays that have really played well in Arizona thus far. Now we're seeing these players make jumps, and we're wondering who's going to jump into the top 100, because as it stands right now, the Jays have two of those guys. Ricky Tiedemann is in the 30s, and Aurelvis Martinez just cracked the top 100 again. He's in the 90s or the 80s, somewhere in that range. So the Jays have some guys that are on the fringe, that are on the cusp of being top 100 prospects, but just aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, and fortunately, maybe depending where you view him, Matt Chapman's probably going to be a guy who's heading away this free agency. So the question is now, which of these guys we're going to be talking about today are going to make the step up into the major league roster, if any, or like many of the proposed scenarios we discussed in other videos, will they make him more of a veteran signing? And Peter, let's just start with the guy that you're pretty high on, the Canadian native Damiano Palmigiani. He launched his fourth home run of the AFL 23 season, and I'll bring up his stats here in a minute, but he's been a guy we discussed in past videos as well. He kind of flew under the radar, kind of like Davis Schneider to a degree did before last season, and this is a guy that maybe we'll see come up through the pipeline, perform in spring training, and ultimately crack the roster depending on how he does in obviously spring training, the rest of the Arizona Fall League. But Peter, what are your thoughts on him so far, and what have you been seeing from him that has impressed you?
Yeah, and he's someone that has a very good approach, similar to Davis Schneider. Also getting slept on as well, because the Jays have a bit of a logjam at that third base position, whether it be Relvis Martinez, Addison Barger. There are guys in the wake in AAA that are ready to go and take that position that Matt Chapman is going to leave vacant this offseason. But don't sleep on Palmigiani. I know he hasn't been to AAA yet. He hasn't been above AA ball, and he's still kind of raw. He's got great power. He's got a good arm, and he's got a lot of tools that could make him a very successful third baseman at the big league level. And don't forget, he also made the Canadian World Baseball Classic team. He didn't play very much, but he was on that roster, and he got that experience alongside some longtime major leaguers. And he actually hit a home run against the Cubs spring training team, in which Cody Bellinger was playing, Dansby Swanson was playing. So he's got some experience against better competition. We see him now really coming into his own in the Arizona Fall League, and it's been very impressive to watch. I mean, he's a big guy. He can play multiple positions in the infield, and definitely someone to keep an eye on. Will he crack the roster out of spring training? Probably not. I don't even think it's a question at this point in time, but I do think he's got a chance to soar into the top 100 prospects. He's a little bit on the older side, but I do think he has a chance to be a future major leaguer and maybe even a star at the next level.
Yeah, you can look at his stats, and like you said, he's a bit of an older prospect. He's been in the system or he's been playing minor league professional baseball since 2018, and he only really started to find it over the past couple of years, and specifically, 2022 and 2023 in particular. Here, you look at the home runs. He has a lot of home run power, putting up 23 home runs in 2023, split between AAA and AA. And like you say, he probably doesn't break the camp, but if you rewind a few years ago to Keto, he was an older kind of prospect, 29 years old, and he made the team. Obviously, he didn't have any impact whatsoever really with the team, but the Jays are kind of, they have in the past went with guys who are older to let their younger guys develop a little bit. So maybe there's a chance he won't break this camp with spring training, but maybe there's a chance he makes an impact later on in the season, maybe a September call-up later on in, obviously, we're talking about a year from now, basically. But he's a guy that we need to keep an eye on, especially because of his power, and the Jays need a lot of power, and he's really, looking at that OPS, unbelievable 2023, and if he can continue that into 2024, I don't know. I can't see him not making his way onto the team, kind of like Davis Schneider did. He forced himself onto the team, and then he ultimately performed.
Yeah, and ultimately, like it's going to come down to how he performs. I mean, we saw Addison Barger. He had a clear pathway this year to making the opening day roster, or at least to being a midseason call up, and he struggled. So you got to keep up that kind of performance. But if you look at his stats yet again here for Palmigiani, I mean, he was an A ball last year,
Yeah.
and he did get up all the way to AAA last season. That's my mistake. I totally forgot that he got called up late in the
At the
year,
end,
but he
yeah.
only played 20 games with the Bisons. So he's going to need a little bit more time in AAA here, but I do suspect that he's going to start the year there and play multiple positions. Maybe he can play some outfield, maybe he can play a little bit of first base, some third base, and really increase his versatility so he could be a better asset. Maybe not to the Blue Jays, but maybe even as a trade chip, because we talked about that logjam, Nick, and a lot of guys that are ready for playing time in AAA that are waiting to get called up here. If Palmigiani just isn't going to cut it amongst those guys, then I'm sure he's really elevated his trade value here, and that the Jays could maybe swing a deal to upgrade another area of their roster.
Yeah, and he put up an almost 1,000 OPS in AAA in his short 20 games. So he's a guy's rising quickly, and keep an eye out for him. And another guy to keep an eye out for is, the guy we all know, which is Orelvis Martinez. He put up 28 home runs, 94 RBIs last year in 2023 combined. And obviously, especially at the AAA level, he started to really find his footing. 850 OPS. He struggled a little bit. It was very, well documented. He struggled a lot to start the year, and if without that struggle, if you take out the first month or so of his play, he would have been a guy who's probably approaching 1,000 or maybe 950 OPS just because of how bad his start was to start the year. But Peter Orelvis Martinez is a more realistic option to start the Blue Jays camp, depending on what route they go with trades and third base. But I want to see Orelvis be given a shot, maybe not to start the year. Again, it completely depends on what kind of replacements, or maybe they re-sign Matt Chapman. We're kind of all under the assumption they're not going to re-sign him, but he could be a guy who starts the season with the team, or maybe halfway through the year gets called up, similar to Davis Schneider, even though he was towards the end.
Yeah, I'm just wondering who would be the immediate replacement at third base if it's not Orelvis Martinez. Maybe you have a stopgap in Kevin Biggio, but you ultimately don't want him starting there every day. And I know he did an adequate job towards the end of the season, but he just doesn't have the same amount of power that Orelvis does. Now, I know this is another year where the Blue Jays are going to try to compete and try to win a World Series. Now, do they think they can do that with a 22-year-old third baseman who's never had an at-bat in the major leagues, who has strikeout problems, who isn't the greatest defensively? I still think he needs a little bit more time, which is why I wanted to bring up Palmigiani today. I know Orelvis Martinez is the shiny new toy that we're all talking about, that is ready to make the impact at the major league level, but I think Palmigiani is the more seasoned hitter as it stands right now, so that's why I wouldn't sleep on him. Barger is another name to keep in the mix, Nick, but if it's not, if it's not Orelvis Martinez, if it's not Palmigiani, if it's not Barger, who's it going to be? Because I don't think they're going to bring back Matt Chapman. And I don't know about you Jays fans out there, but I don't know if I want Kevin Biggio and Espinal platooning at third base for half of a major league season. That's just not going to work for me.
No, they're probably not. Maybe they bring in a veteran guy depending on how all in they are. But one quick final note is a guy to watch out for is Landon Morotis, just a guy that could be a top 100 prospect next year. We want to throw that out there in case he is, so then we look super, super smart in a few months from now. But that'll wrap up the video, Peter. Any quick final thoughts before we wrap up? And hopefully the Jays, make some moves once the World Series ends and everything gets going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've all been really critical on Ross Atkins and the scouting team, or whoever's been in charge of these decisions that we've seen lately. But all these guys that have been drafted have really kind of turned into good prospects here. Landon Morotis was one of the guys that they drafted this year, and he's already in talks to be a top 100 prospect. Arjun Namala was a steal, so the Jays' future is looking bright, but we want to see some current success, and we want to see some present day magic from this group that we haven't seen as of late. So it's going to be interesting to follow, but I'm happy with the way that the prospects have been panning out thus far. I'm happy with the way things have been unfolding, and it's going to be a very fun offseason for this Blue Jays team.
And hopefully they can do so. If you want to check out our video from yesterday, click the video on your screen right now. It is about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and some changes to his offseason work. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.